Well, thank you all very much.
George, wait.
What? Mike's right here.
This works too.
That works too.
Okay, that's fine.
Is there a steer way out? Brad says people can't see me if I'm down there. I think you saw me there because I can see you. But
if you're not standing on your feet, a standing ovation is for George Takei.
well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's good to see you all and be here. Well, you know, I arrived yesterday because they told me that I was going to do a convention in Pittsburgh. I arrived at the Pittsburgh airport. They put me in a car and they brought me here to a place called Monroeville. You know, I spent four months last year filming Super Ninjas in Pittsburgh, and we got to know and love Pittsburgh. It's a charming place. It's a place that can double as Gotham City. And yes, the Batman. And we got to know some of the restaurants there. We have a lot of favorite restaurants in Pittsburgh now. We made some friends, and we got to love the whole lay of that city. The Monongahela and the Allegheny coming together at the confluence of the Ohio River. I know the history of it. And I love places that keep their indigenous names. Monongahela. You know, it just rolls off the tongue. Allegheny, you know. It's a charming place. But they brought me to Monroeville. And ever since yesterday, I've been asking the people that came by my table, you know, for the autographs, do you live in Monroeville? No. Do you live in Monroeville? No. No one lives in Monroeville. You're all from someplace else. Oh, you live here. Raise your hands, all of you that live in Monroeville. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people. All of you that live in Pittsburgh, raise your hands. Why don't you Pittsburgh people lobby to get this convention in your town? We went to a Japanese restaurant, and I had sushi. There isn't too much you can do to sushi because it's raw. But Brad had, he loves tempura, shrimp. But they put some kind of glop over it. Monroeville tempura. I kind of pause when I say that word because it ain't tempura. And then he had kushiyaki, little bits of chicken on skewers. But then they put another glop, a different kind, a dark brown glop over it. They don't know what Japanese food is. We're thinking of going Mexican tonight. I'm from Los Angeles. The proper pronunciation of my city's name is La Ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de Los Ángeles, sobre el río Porciúncula. Can you say it? It's a lovely name. It means the village of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels, by the river Porciúncula, which was the name of the river that ran through it. The Indians called it Porciúncula. Now, today, we call it the LA River. So unromantic. And so I know my Mexican food. The best enchiladas and tacos in all of Los Angeles was made by Mrs. Takei, my mother. A Japanese American who made the best Mexican food in all of LA. Brad is from Arizona, and they know how to do their style of Mexican food. So tonight we're going to examine what Monroeville Mexican is going to be like. We boldly go where we've never gone before. But certainly the people who come to Monroeville from someplace else, and there was one person from Indianapolis, another from Chicago, and another person from Delaware. You know, they come from all over to Monroeville for a convention. And you guys are wonderful. You're a wonderful audience, and you are great supporters of Star Trek throughout the generations. I recognize the old original, I shouldn't use that old word. I recognize the original Star Trek fans. I can just look around and identify you, because they're of my generation. What? No, not that old word. We are the original, that old word, original Star Trek. But we also love the next generation. And don't look so self-satisfied, because you're rapidly aging. You're going to qualify for AARP very soon. But you're bringing up your children right. And they are Star Trek lovers too. In fact, in line today, there was a cutie. I think her name is Ellie. Oh, there she is. I recognize the cry. All generations are all Star Trek lovers. So bless your heart. Thank you very much for the support you've been giving us. And I know that you have a lot of comments, opinions. Oh, you're opinionated. And questions. Maybe even some criticisms too. So let's begin with the first person in line there. Oh, and I got to say, you guys are all very patient. The long lines here, and you spend hours, or at least hour and a half, in those lines. So I'm very touched. Thank you very much. You're very, very devoted fans. And now you're first in line, so you've been standing there for a while too.
For a little bit, George. Okay, my first one is from Terry Lynn from Massively Magazine, and she wants to know, is the world mature enough for an openly gay captain?
You know, Starfleet, or Star Trek takes place 300 years from now. Ellie, it's all right. It is Ellie, yes. No, it isn't. Ella. You know, sometimes I feel exactly the way you do, but I can't cry. I'm a grown-up. Bless your honesty. What was it?
She wanted to know if the world was mature enough for an openly gay captain.
Oh, well, you know, Star Trek takes place in the 23rd century. We're in the 21st century. And believe me, just from the time that we started Star Trek back in 1965 to the 13th year of the 21st century, amazing changes have happened. I mean, this year particularly, the year 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States of America did away with the Defense of Marriage Act, which meant that now love prevails in whatever form. Actually, in California, in 2008, we got marriage equality. And so Brad and I were the first couple to get our marriage license in West Hollywood. So if this kind of change is happening already within a period of less than 50 years, can you imagine what's going to happen in 280 more years? I think it'll be nothing unusual. It'll be commonplace. Oh, you're getting married. You know, whether you're two men, two women, a man and a woman, it's going to be a commonplace thing. Are you African and Norwegian, commonplace thing. We have a president who is biracial, and that would have been unthinkable only back when Star Trek started. So we're making amazing progress and making rapid progress. I mean, just look at the technology that we have. On Star Trek, we were astounded by the advanced technology. We had this little tiny device on our hip that we tore off, flipped open, and started talking on it. No cords. And today, we have that and then some, and it's a real nuisance in our society. All these chatty people everywhere, and not only can we chat on it with no cords, but we can take pictures with it, send text messages with it, watch movies on it. We're advancing at an amazing rate. So that question won't be asked at all by that time. It'll be a part of normal society.
All right. And the second part was Jim Cawley's Blood and Fire. What do you think the impact of that has had, if you've seen it?
I have seen it. And, I think all of this, it's not just one thing, but it's the entire society changing and making contributions. And certainly, I know I was affected profoundly in 1969 when Stonewall happened, because at that time I was living a double life. I passionately wanted to be an actor. And by that time, I got my first series called Star Trek. And, it was wonderful to be working on that series, the kind of quality scripts that we had, and the kind of people we had to work with. And we were making wonderful episodes after wonderful episodes, but unfortunately, we couldn't get the ratings for it. And in that same year, 1969, we were canceled. I was unemployed. And here, this electrifying thing called Stonewall, a gay bar in Greenwich Village in New York. I've been going to gay bars during that time. They were places where, I was living a double life. During the day, I was working as an actor and public and going to various events, going to industry parties and openings, and I had a female friend that I took to those places. But in the evenings, I was going to a place where I could relax, a gay bar, where there was friendship and camaraderie and being able to let your hair down. They were also rather sleazy places that, found in dark alleys. And the first thing you learn when you start going to a gay bar is the police raid you. It was a criminal activity to be in a gay bar. And when they raided you, they marched you out of that bar, loaded you onto paddy wagons, took you down to the police station, and photographed you and fingerprinted you. And if they went public with those pictures and the records, it could have destroyed your life. You would have lost your job. You might have lost your family. It was enormously destructive. And the people meekly got loaded onto those paddy wagons. So the first thing you did when you went to a gay bar was to look for the exit signs, know where you can escape from. That's the way I was living. And then Stonewall happened. For the first time, gays, lesbians, and drag queens said, I won't take it anymore. This harassment, this intimidation, for no good reason than our just being in a place where we felt comfortable. And they resisted. For the first time, they refused to go with the police. And they started throwing things. Beer bottles, salt shakers, chairs, and they stood firm on their feet, and the drag queens stood strong on their high-heeled shoes, and they forced the police out. And the police got out onto the streets and and started calling for reinforcement. But the people inside the bar also started calling their friends that lived in Greenwich Village. And the people started pouring out, and they joined in on that. And they resisted in great numbers. And that riot, that resistance, went on for 3 nights and 4 days straight. And finally the police said, all right, let's talk about it. And they started calling meetings. And from that began the gay liberation movement. It was an electrifying thing. And yet, I was silent because I wanted my career. And you couldn't work in Hollywood if you were known as a gay person, because we're dependent on box office and ratings, and that's what determined whether you're viable or not. And I was silent throughout that whole period until something precedent-setting happened in California in 2005. In 2005, both houses of the California legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, passed the marriage equality bill. It was a precedent-setting thing. Massachusetts had marriage equality at that time, but it came through the courts, through the Massachusetts Supreme Court. This was, in California, this was when the legislature, the people's representative, voted for marriage equality. And all that was needed for that to become the law of the state was the signature of one person, the governor of the state of California. And that man was a movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. When he ran for governor, he ran by saying, I'm from Hollywood, I've worked with gays and lesbians, some of my best friends are gays and lesbians, the whole cliche bit. And so we thought surely a friend of the community would sign the bill. But his base was the arch-reactionary Republican constituency, and he vetoed it. And I was seething. I was raging over that, but I was still silent. And that night, we saw the 11 o'clock news, and young people were pouring out onto Santa Monica Boulevard, venting their rage against Governor Schwarzenegger. And that's when Brad and I discussed it, and I decided I have to speak out on that issue. And for me to do that, my voice needs to be authentic. And I spoke to the press for the first time as a gay man. And that's what the press has deemed to be my coming out. I was out long before that, certainly family and friends, otherwise I wouldn't have met Brad. So society is changing, and it's changing because people come out, and we discover that a professional football player is gay, or we find out that a banker is gay. It's all part of society. In fact, we're all the children of straight people. We're brothers and sisters of straight people. And people are starting to recognize that. We are literally members of the family, flesh and blood. And it's starting to show in the polling. In a recent California field poll, they found that 78% of people under 39, and I consider them young people, 39 is young to me, all support equality for LGBT people. I love young people. And I love especially young straight couples, because they're going to be making the gay babies of tomorrow. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing today, to make that future of the gay babies of tomorrow be different from ours, where it won't be an issue, we won't be commenting on, marriage equality or anything having to do with gay, but, it's like, he's Norwegian, he's Argentinian, she's from Canada, it's all part of the diversity of our society. And so to that question, I say, don't be so old-fashioned.
Thank you, Mr. Takei.
Takei.
Last words?
Takei.
Oh my.
Let me give you a quick Japanese lesson. My surname gets mispronounced all sorts of things. I've been called Tacky-eye or Tacky. I've been called Tacky, and that is tacky. I've even been called Tequila, you know. How they get that? It's Takei, not Takai. But I don't object to that mispronunciation Takai, because there is a Japanese word that's pronounced Takai, which translates into English as expensive. So whoever calls me Takai, I tell them, oh, I'll have my agent send you a billing. I'm Takei, which doesn't mean cheap either. Yes.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm quite fine. How are you?
You have the greatest voice of all time, so I just want to compliment you
All
on that.
time. Oh my. You wanted that, didn't you?
I'm not going to say that you have a face for radio, but I will say that you have a voice for radio, no doubt about it. I don't know if everybody knows here, but George, since 2006, has been the announcer on the Howard Stern Show.
I'm proud of it.
And I want to thank you for that, because every time you're on, the entire week is so much better for me. So thank you for being on the Stern Show.
Oh, it's
on a
great
regular
fun.
basis.
You know, anyone who has a chance to get on the Howard Stern Show, well, I wouldn't say anyone, because it's a little challenging. Particularly buxom ladies. Because he will ask you questions that eventually will lead up to, will you take your bra off? Oh my, indeed. That question is an oh my, but then when they actually do, that's oh my, oh my.
And George, the question, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to this stage in your career, what the Howard Stern Show has meant to you.
I was, working reasonably regularly, but we had what we call in the business between engagement time, And once I started doing Howard Stern, it all changed. He gave new life, new energy, new momentum to my career. And it's surprising the kind of people that listen to the Howard Stern Show. I thought it was always these boys in the bar, but studio heads listen to Howard Stern. College professors listen to Howard Stern. I was really turned aback by that. And I started getting cast in TV shows and guest parts. And this time, usually when I do guest parts, I'm playing a part, a role. But this time, they're casting me in roles that's named George Takei. The characters may have been named George Takei, but it really wasn't me. It was, a very exaggerated, magnified comic characters. But I started working much more regularly than I had before Howard Stern. So he did revive, give second breath to my second wind, I should say, to my career. And I'm having a great time at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Mr. George.
Hi.
I didn't want to mess around with your last name, but
Just call me Uncle George.
sounds good. This speaks to the first couple questions, but I just wanted to thank you for all your work in the gay community.
Well, we're all pulling the same wagon, aren't we? Moving our society forward.
Right. This is my fiance of 1 year. We're celebrating today, so.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you. So I was going to ask what inspired you to be so active in the community, but you've already answered that. So I was wondering what keeps you inspired despite all the negative, social media that can come up these days.
Well, because there's all the positive social media. You can't be affected by the negative because there's enough of that out there. But there are so many people that are positive, affirmative, initiative-taking, optimistic people. And that's what gives you the energy, the inspiration, and the incentive to keep on doing it. And as a nation and as a society, we are making progress. As a global society, there are many places where, you know, it's capital punishment for people that are gay. You know, like in Africa, or it may not be capital punishment in law in Russia, but many people, many gay and lesbians have been beaten up to the point where they eventually die of their injuries. There are backward countries that still cannot recognize the diversity of sexual orientation in our society. So we are making progress, and that's why that's where I take my inspiration. So many good people joining in, and they're not all LGBT people. They are straight people that we consider to be allies, joining in the same way that, you know, when the United States was founded, women had no rights. You couldn't vote. You couldn't own property. You had no rights over your own children. Women were essentially like chattel. And yet, because determined women and fair-minded men, you know, the men had votes and everything else, but they were fair-minded people. They were allies, and they joined in on the struggle for marriage, equal rights for women. That today, we've had women corporate CEOs. 3 women have become U.S. Secretaries of State. A woman astronaut has led a team of astronauts and gone soaring off into space. And that's, you know, happening in our society as regularly as anything else. We don't make a big comment about it. When this nation was founded at one point, you know, the ideals of our country, the shining, glorious ideals, were articulated by great men, the founding fathers. But those founding fathers also kept other human beings as slaves. But because determined people, they may have been slaves, but they were hungry for freedom and justice, and they struggled for it, and their children and their grandchildren and the generations that followed struggled for it. And they had allies, you know, white people that joined in on it, that today we have an African American as a president of the United States. So, you know, we are making progress, and I don't let the negativists, the hate people and all that affect you. And don't you let the naysayers affect you either, because history will prove that we are right. We are arguing for what's just, what's fair, what's decent.
Thank you very much. You and your husband.
Hi, Uncle George.
Hi.
Out of all the revelations you've made,
You know, I have so many nephews, I don't know their names.
My name's Nick.
Hi, nephew Nick.
Look, out of all the revelations you've made on the Howard Stern show, which one do you most wish you could take back?
There are so many. And when I come home, I hear from someone, you know who. I pay a heavy price for each one of those mistakes that I've made. And well,
Thank you.
I'm learning to think twice before I open my mouth.
Hi, George. I've come from London, England to see you today.
One of my favorite cities. I'm an Anglophile. Did you know that I have a direct connection with their royalty?
No, I did not know that.
I was born in 1937 when George VI was crowned. George, Elizabeth's father. My father was an Anglophile, and so he decided to name me after the King George VI. So I am named after English royalty. And so, you know, when my brother was born, he was round and fat and roly-poly, full of baby fat. He was as fat as Henry VIII. Guess what his name is? We are a family of Japanese Americans named after English royalty.
Weirdly, my question is about your childhood and about your name. I was very interested that in the series Heroes, your character's surname was your mother's maiden name. Is that correct?
Yes, Nakamura.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your mother and about your childhood?
Well, my mother was born in Sacramento. My grandparents came from Japan. My maternal grandparents were in farming near Sacramento. And my paternal grandfather, he was a widower, came from Japan and he to San Francisco. And rural California back in those days was not too different from rural American South. They had two schools, one for the white kids and another one, which was a ramshackle structure, was for the Mexican and Asian kids. And my mother went to the segregated school. But my grandfather was fairly successful as a farmer, so he didn't want his children getting inferior education and bad treatment, and maybe getting sick in one of those ramshackle buildings. So he sent his children to Japan to be educated. So my mother came back when she was about 19 years old, I think. And so born in America, but she was educated in Japan. And my father was a San Franciscan, educated in San Francisco. But when Pearl Harbor was bombed, overnight, we were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order ordering all Japanese Americans on the West Coast, American citizens, mind you, American citizens, to be rounded up with no charges, no trial, no due process, which is a pillar of our justice system, and rounded up and put into barbed wire prison camps just because we happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor, because of our ancestry. It was a very racist act, and it was a very unconstitutional act because we didn't know what we did done wrong. No charges. How can you fight it in court when they have no charges against you? Although there were a few that challenged it, and they were thrown into federal penitentiary for challenging the presidential order. So that was how, and then I was a child, 5 years old at the time, and we were first ordered out of our home at gunpoint and taken to the horse stables at a nearby racetrack. Can you imagine going from a two-bedroom home on Garnet Street in Los Angeles to a narrow, smelly horse stall? All five of us, 3 kids and our parents, in that narrow horse stall. But I was 5 years old, and I thought, we get to sleep where the horsies sleep. I can smell the horsies too, For me, I was too young to understand what was happening, but for my parents, it was the most degrading, humiliating, painful. I mean, everything was lost. My father used to say, they took my business, they took our home, they took our freedom. The one thing I'm not going to give them is my dignity. I'm not going to grovel before this government. We were there for about 3 months, and then they put us on a train with armed guards at both ends of each car and taken to the swamps of southeastern Arkansas. Barbed wire fences, sentry towers, machine guns pointed at us. When I made the night runs to the latrine from our barrack, searchlights followed me. it was a prison camp. But you know, as a kid, when I was making those night runs, I thought it was kind of nice that they lit the way for me to pee. You know? Too young to really understand. When I went to school in a black tar paper barrack, they taught us to pledge allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence in the Sentry Tower right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." Irony that I didn't understand. It was one of the most shameful, unconstitutional acts in American history.
Thank you for telling us about that.
I know that what I have to say is probably stupid, but do you miss Hikaru Sulu?
Oh, don't say stupid things, especially publicly.
I know.
At least have the image, the facade of being an intelligent person.
I love you because I've seen you as Hikaru Sulu all my life, and I just love
I
you.
think it's very smart, very perceptive,
And you know what?
and it shows
The first
very
time
good taste.
I saw you without a shirt on, I thought, oh, he's so gorgeous. He's probably gay or married.
Well, I'm both.
See, I'm out of luck.
And I think you're intelligent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that you get to be involved in the new Star Trek, even if it's just.
Knock on wood.
Sorry, I'm going to pass this back.
We
to
have
the
time
next
for
person.
one more question, about 5 minutes left. Please.
Hey now.
Hey now.
First, I'd like to thank Brad for being a good sport when you're on the Howard Stern show.
I wish he were a good sport when I got home.
Also, I'd like to thank you for being one of my inspirations in being in civil service. Also, my question is, what is one of your famous moments of being on the Howard Stern show, besides the famous bachelor party and besides the fake conversation, the heated fake conversation with Arnold Schwarzenegger? What is your most memorable?
Two opposites, aren't they?
Yeah.
The bachelor party where, I was afraid to go home after that. But he was proud of me for having had that conversation with the fake Arnold Schwarzenegger.
What is your memorable moment that you would say besides those two?
Memorable moments. Well, they wanted Brad to come onto the show often, almost all the time. And once he agreed to come onto the show, and I was so proud of him. He had the guts to, despite all the things that I had said about him on the air, he came to the studio and he participated in the program. And I called him Bradder. That's my name for him. And now everybody knows that. So a lot of Stern listeners, when they see him on the street, they call him Bradder.
Thank you.
Want to squeeze one more question? Yeah, just real quick. We got just a few minutes.
In the episode where you and the other crew members were infected by the alien virus and you were all when you guys were all like crazy and you had to fight, did you have to take lessons on how to fence, or did you already know how to?
Well, I was fencing from the time that I was a child. My parents took me to see Errol Flynn in the Adventures of Robin Hood, if you know that movie. It was a spectacular swashbuckling movie. And it really affected me. When we got home, I asked my mother to make me a Robin Hood outfit, which I wore to the Halloween party at school. And then I got an idea. My backyard could become Sherwood Forest, but I needed, my Maid Marian and Friar Tuck and Prince John and so forth. So I had my mother make those costumes, and I rounded up all my friends, and we had a Robin Hood Let's Pretend in my backyard. I just discovered today that that episode, Naked Time, was written by John D.F. I knew it was written by John D.F. Black, but he comes from Pittsburgh, right here, which I did not know. About 3 weeks before we were to shoot that, John came on the set. We were sitting set side, and he told me that he had this script where I was going to be terrorizing my crewmates on the ship with a samurai sword. And I said to him, well, that's ethnically consistent because I'm of Japanese ancestry, you know. But I said, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't play samurai. I played cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians. And well, why don't you consider putting a fencing foil in his hands? Because I used to, I loved swashbuckling with a fencing foil. And he said, oh, do you know how to fence? And I said, oh, I'm an expert at it. Been doing it since I was a kid. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. This is sci-fi. I said, absolutely. You know, Sulu is a 23rd century guy. He would not see his heritage as strictly ethnic. It would be a global, much more widespread sense of heritage. And he says, that's a good idea. I'll develop it that way. And that's how he got the fencing foil in his hand. However, my experience with the fencing foil was based on my childhood let's pretend thing. So I opened up the yellow pages. Do you know what they are? Some of the younger people. We had a great big thick book printed on yellow paper that had the telephone numbers of everybody, plus the telephone numbers of all the businesses. In fact, they took out ads. And I looked up fencing lessons, and there was a fencing school on Sunset Boulevard called the Falcon Studio. And I phoned them up, and I was taking my first formal fencing lesson that Saturday at the Falcon Studio. However, there was another interesting connection there, because the instructor that I had, his name was Mr. Faulkner, and he was in great shape. He was in his late 60s, but you know, he had great muscles and physique and great posture, and he was a great athlete. And I discovered that he choreographed the fencing sequences in The Adventures of Robin Hood, and he had doubled for Basil Rathbone because Basil Rathbone was a lousy fencer. And so I was, as a child, watching Mr. Faulkner's back, you know, when Errol Flynn was fighting Basil Rathbone. So I took my lessons from the man who choreographed The Adventures of Robin Hood, and it was such a thrill learning from him. He was on the Olympics team, U.S. Olympics team with fencing. So it was a big circle round. As a child, having seen that film and looking at the back of Mr. Faulkner in those close-up scenes for Errol Flynn, and taking my own lessons from that same man. So yes, I did have a lot of experience for that Naked Time scene. And thank you all very much. It was great chatting with you. Live long and prosper.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up, Mr. George Takei. Thank you so much.